A quiet place to die. Chapter 1. An honest day's theft.
The Indomitable Misery was flying crooked again, which isn't unusual, to be honest. The Indomitable Misery, a small, cobbled-together transport that was more of a flying coffin than a star-faring vessel. Its hull was a patchwork of scavenged plating and shoddy repairs, and its engines coughed and sputtered with the asthmatic wheeze of a dying beast. It looked less like a vessel of the Imperium and more like a discarded toy, an ugly, boxy thing designed for function, not form. The kind of ship that wouldn't so much land as it would find the nearest hard surface and introduce itself with a shudder. A far cry from the sleek gun cutters of the Imperial Navy, the Misery was an insult to its grand, ironic name. It's home, but by the God Emperor, I hate it. My name is Chiron Vale, captain, scavenger, smuggler, and as far as the Imperium's archives are concerned, a man who doesn't exist. I've spent more of my life on the fringes of the void than in it, and I've learned that a good lie is as valuable as a full fuel tank. The trick is to never believe your own. I felt the crooked flight in the way my mug of recaf slid a fraction across the console, the liquid inside trembling as though it knew something I didn't. I caught it before it toppled, took a sip, and grimaced at the burnt, metallic bite. It always tasted vaguely wrong. Not bad, just a pale imitation of the real thing. I was the only one who ever seemed to notice. "This is the last job," a voice from the pilot's chair muttered. "The very last one before I find a ship with a working hull. You can't fly straight, let alone left. We're a glorified rust bucket, and I'm a glorified babysitter for a bunch of misfits." This was Ilara. She was a recent addition to the crew, a human pilot with a face that looked permanently etched with exhaustion and disdain. Her previous ship and crew had been press-ganged by a rival, and she had come to me with a simple proposition: flying the Misery until she could earn enough to get out of her contract. Her disdain for the ship and the crew was a constant presence, a cloud of low-level professional misery that I found comforting. She nudged the flight stick, and the ship's shuddering became a little less pronounced. Ilara didn't have much to say, but when she did, it was usually a complaint. Beyond the cracked viewplate, the void stretched in every direction, endless, silent, and never as peaceful as it looked. The only thing separating us from the cold vacuum of space was a few inches of groaning, rust-colored metal and the Emperor's dubious benevolence. Still, it might not have been much, but the Misery was home. I sighed. My life sucked. It's a messy, precarious existence that began with a lie and continues with a headache. Speaking of which, a slow, grinding rasp vibrated through the deck plates, steel biting stone in a measured rhythm. I turned to see Gorzak hunched over a whetstone. He was an orc, big and green, but a rare sight among human crew. Well, no, not that rare, I suspect. How about a rare sight among living human crew? That is probably more accurate. Most orcs were mindless brutes. Gorzak was just simple-minded. He followed a simple rule: if it moved, you hit it. If it didn't try to hit you back, you could eat it. His massive hands worked a jagged blade with surprising delicacy. Each pass shed a faint curl of oil and metal that drifted down onto the scuffed plating between his boots. "Why in here?" I asked. "Quieter," the orc said without looking up. "Less shouting." Resisting the urge to ask where there was more shouting, I shook my head and turned back to the stars. The cockpit vox crackled, a burst of binaric static shifting into words. "Captain, the machine spirit tells me that the port stabilizer is expressing discomfort." Before I could reply, the door hissed open and Hex 7 shuffled in, servo limbs clicking. The tech priest was a tangled web of wires and unlicensed augmetics, less human than machine. His patchwork robe hung crooked on their frame, its cogwheel sigil half burned away as if someone had tried and failed to erase it. A thin plume of incense smoke coiled from a vent in their chest plate as they leaned over the diagnostics console, muttering in cogitator cant. "It will endure," Hex said, "provided you refrain from turning left for the next 3 days. But should its core programming ever be compromised, a purge of the system would be required for the health of all related systems. A protocol, of course." I exhaled through my nose. Noted. The weapons console glowed amber as Vera slid into the chair without a sound. She was an Eldar, all sharp angles and pale skin, with a long-standing grudge against the rest of the galaxy. Apparently, there were 2 types of Eldar in the galaxy. One lot would merely torture you to death, if you were lucky. The others would manipulate an entire species into extinction, if it meant they could avoid one of them getting a stubbed toe. I don't know which type she is, but the look in her eyes sometimes makes me worry I'm about to find out. She moved with an alien grace that made a mockery of the ship's ancient machinery. Her pale eyes moved over the readings with clinical precision, long fingers dancing over controls I couldn't name. The Misery creaked like a bulk freighter if you breathed too hard, yet somehow she could cross half the deck without stirring the air. "Your piloting is as crooked as your morals," she murmured, glancing at Ilara in the pilot's chair with open disdain. Ilara didn't even look at her, her eyes fixed on the viewplate. "It's called evasive posture." "There's nothing to evade," Vera said dismissively. "That's what they want you to think." The measured thump of armored boots drew closer. Heavy, deliberate, certain. Brother Castus emerged in the doorway, ducking to fit his bulk through. He used to be a space marine, a warrior from the Lamenters chapter, and a walking monument to bad luck. Technically, he still was a space marine, but he had left the chapter a long time ago. He hadn't shared why, though, and when you are a 3-meter-tall, genetically engineered transhuman killing machine, you don't get many questions other than polite pleasantries. His yellow armor was battered and dull, the black teardrop badge of his chapter scored by a deep gouge that nearly severed it. The aquila etched into his helm's brow was worn smooth in places, as if by years of handling. "Status?" he asked. He pointedly ignored both Vera and Grozak, obviously pretending they weren't there. I gestured to the viewplate. Empty space, questionable ship integrity, and a captain still clinging to the hope of a quiet hour. "Good," Castus said. "Keeps you from thinking too much." Hex's mechadendrite snapped toward the Vox console. "Incoming transmission, unsecured channel, poor encryption, worst taste in file headers." A voice slithered into the cockpit, a too smooth offer for dangerous work. A derelict Mechanicus research station, no registry, no current occupants. Payment in thrones and fuel chits for the retrieval of a specific container. The grainy pict showed the station adrift in the halo of a dying star, its hull black and ports sealed. "Trap," Vera said instantly. "Definitely a trap," Castus agreed, apparently forgetting that Vera wasn't there. Ilara sighed heavily. "Is there any job on this ship that isn't a trap? I swear your resume must be an obituary." "Could be a loot trap," Gorzak offered. "Day's me favorite quand." I kept staring at the image. A payday like this wouldn't just cover Dravik's docking fees, it might buy time. Time before the portmaster's friends came sniffing. Time before the debt collectors with Inquisition-grade clearance codes caught up to the Misery. "All right," I said finally, "we take the job." Vera arched an eyebrow. "You've just agreed to something that's probably going to kill us." "Which," I said, "means I won't have to pay Dravik at all." Gorzak barked a laugh. "Ha! That Humi still after you? Thought you had paid him off." "I did," I said. "Just not the full amount, or the interest, or the late fees, or anything at all," Vera cut in. Hex 7's Vox grill rattled in something like amusement. Glorious. Another suicide run. I took another sip of recaf, the metallic taste curling my lip. Story of my life.
Chapter 2. Shadows Among the Stars.
The Indomitable Misery hummed low and steady as Ilara navigated the final approach. Her focus was absolute, her hands a blur of practiced motion on the worn controls. She still hadn't said a word since we took the job, her silence a more potent form of disapproval than any of Vera's hissed insults. The rest of the crew, meanwhile, was gathered in the main cabin, a simmering pot of mutual dislike. I leaned against a rusted bulkhead, a hand on my last pistol. The docking fees gnawed at me like a persistent underhive rat. Dravik's voice lingered in my head. You owe me, and I don't forget debts. Gorzak sat cross-legged nearby, eyes glued to his chopper as he tapped at a chip in the blade. You think it's hungry? He asked. I didn't answer. Simple, brutal, and often effective. That was Gorzak in a nutshell. Vera leaned against the console, pale eyes sweeping the readouts with a practiced detachment that made me uneasy and impressed me in equal measure. We're threading the skeleton of a dead station with a blind luck magnet at the helm, she said, dry, bitter, and a hint of sarcasm. Somehow I feel real safe. Castus shifted near the bulkhead, fingers brushing the grip of his bolt pistol mag locked to his armor. His eyes flicked between Gorzak and Vera. Jagged lines, flickering lights, smoke curling wrong. Something waits, and I don't like it, he muttered as he put his helmet on. Enough to make a lamenter's blood run cold. His suspicion wasn't idle. He had a lifetime of practice reading omens, especially bad ones. Gorzak grunted, gravelly and unconcerned. Smash anything what looks scary. Makes it simple. Simple isn't a plan, I muttered, imagining the repair bill if Gorzak actually followed through. Hex 7 whirred happily, practically vibrating across the console. Sensors optimal. Docking sequence efficiency at 97%. Excitement maximum. Risk manageable. Let's go team. Hex was the only one who didn't seem to grasp the gravity of our situation. His enthusiasm was a bright, unthinking pulse in the middle of our dysfunction, and I both hated it and desperately needed it. I pressed my lips together. The unspoken truth pressed around me like gravity. None of us actually liked each other. Not really. We tolerated one another, bickered endlessly, and occasionally combined enough competence to survive. The misery shuddered as it aligned with the station. From the viewplate, the derelict loomed, a sprawling skeletal husk of once-functioning docks and habitation rings, its hull mottled with rust and scorch marks, windows gaping like empty eyes. Bits of debris clung to the surface as if the station itself were holding its breath. I exhaled and gripped the hatch controls. All right. Let's see if we survive this day. The hiss of the hatch opening echoed across the bay.
Chapter 3. Shadows Among the Stars.
The hiss of the hatch opening echoed across the bay, a hollow mechanical sigh that gave way to the stagnant chill of the derelict station. We were all suited up, our breaths fogging in the cold. I led the way, my hand resting on my last pistol, the familiar weight of cold comfort. Ilara, her face a mask of professional apathy, walked beside me, a battered laser gun held loosely in her hands. The air was dead, a sterile absence of scent or sound, thick with the silence of a place that had died a long time ago. But the silence felt normal, just a lack of noise, not an oppressive presence. A tomb, Vera hissed from behind me, her voice cutting through the quiet. Not a trap. Castus grunted, his ceramite boots thudding softly on the metal deck. The air smells wrong, not of death, but of something old, something waiting. To be fair, I trusted Castus and his instinct for danger. As a lamenter, foreboding is practically a chapter tradition. I was just glad he wasn't a doom eagle. Ilara snorted. The air smells like recycled air in a broken box. The only thing waiting here is a rust monster, probably. Let's just find the damn box and go. Hex 7, a happy whirring of gears and servos, was practically skipping. Atmospheric composition is stable. Trace elements of a high-efficiency coolant still present. Possibility of tech acquisition, high. I raised a hand, stopping the crew. The bay was a cavernous space, dimly lit by the Misery's own floodlights. Rusted shuttles hung in ancient docking claws, their hulls a mottled mosaic of decay. Dust motes danced in the light, a silent, swirling testament to the passing of ages. "All right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We're not here to poke around. We find the container, we get paid, we get out. No unnecessary noise, no—" My warning was cut off by a sound that tore through the sterile silence like a thunderclap, a guttural, earth-shaking roar. Gorzak, standing at the back of the group, was now flexing his massive arms, his eyes wide with a savage glee. His choppa was held high, its jagged blade glinting in the pale light. He hadn't seen anything, of course. He was just so happy to be on a station that smelled of metal and danger that he couldn't help himself. A collective groan went through the crew. "Gorzak!" Vera hissed, her hand flying to her own blade. "Be silent, you fool!" Castus's head snapped towards the orc, his hand clenching into a fist. "By the Emperor, will you not show some discipline?" Gorzak, utterly oblivious to their rage, just toothily grinned. "What? Thought we was supposed to be scaring the bad things?" My headache, which had only been a distant promise, now arrived with a vengeance. My fingers twitched, wanting to slap the big oaf. "No, Gorzak. We were supposed to be quietly getting past the bad things." Hex 7, meanwhile, had found a derelict cogitator terminal. He was burbling happily to himself, his mechadendrites a blur of motion as he plugged into the ancient machine. The sound of his joyous static filled the air, the only uncynical noise for light years. "He's not worth the effort," Vera said, her voice laced with venom. "I'm detecting a data echo. It points inward, towards the central spire. A powerful signature even after all this time." I nodded, my gaze sweeping the gloom ahead. Gorzak's roar had just announced our presence to anything and everything on this station. It was no longer a matter of quiet infiltration. Now, it was a race against whatever was listening.
Chapter 4. The Spire Beckons.
Gorzak's roar still seemed to echo in the cavernous docking bay, a lingering stain on the silence. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the corridor ahead. A blast door, pitted and scarred, slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, the gloom was absolute, broken only by the thin, bobbing beams of our helmet lamps. Vera took the lead, her movements silent as a whisper. Her pale eyes were constantly in motion, scanning shadows that I couldn't even perceive. Castus, a hulking monument of battered yellow armor, followed close behind me, his hand on his bolter. The way he kept his weapon aimed vaguely in Gorzak's direction told me all I needed to know about his trust in the orc. "A path of 87% efficiency," Hex 7 announced happily, his voice a burst of static over the comms. He was following our progress on a datapad, his mechadendrites a blur of motion as he analyzed the station's ancient schematics. "Minor structural instability in the southern access corridor. Estimated bypass time 4.73 minutes. Maximum speed optimal." I ignored him, my own gaze sweeping the corridor. The walls were a patchwork of rust and ancient conduits, some hanging like severed arteries. Dust lay thick on everything, disturbed only by our footprints. The air was cold, with a faint metallic tang that made my teeth ache. "It's quiet," I whispered, the sound feeling loud in the silence. "Too quiet," Castus rumbled, his voice a low growl, "like a wolf holding its breath." "Or a corpse," Vera added without breaking stride. Ilara's voice crackled on the comms, a flat, matter-of-fact tone. Or a derelict station that's just been powered up again. I'm getting a sudden energy spike from the central spire. Someone's home. Gorzak, for once, was silent. He walked with a heavy tread, his choppa scraping lightly against the floor. I saw him glance at the shadows, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. The absence of something to hit seemed to genuinely confuse him. We rounded a corner, our lights illuminating a series of sealed maintenance doors. One of them, however, was ajar. A thin line of light, a sickly amber, bled from the crack. "Hold," I said, raising a fist. We froze. "A flickering light," Castus muttered, his voice even lower now. "The signs are upon us." Vera was already moving, her back pressed against the opposite wall. "The data echo is coming from beyond that door. It's intensifying." My heart hammered against my ribs. A flickering light on a derelict station was a bad omen. A flickering light when a lamenter was already on edge was an outright disaster. I crept forward, my hand steady on my pistol. I saw a small object on the floor next to the door. It was a skull, but it was not human. It was long and thin, its eye sockets empty, and its jaw hinged in an unnatural way. A relic of a tech priest, an augmetic skull, just left behind. My stomach clenched. A sudden sharp hum filled the air, a sound of machinery awakening after a long, long sleep. The flickering light from beyond the door brightened, a harsh yellow flare that washed over the deck plates. I flinched as Hex 7's cheerful voice broke the tense silence. "Captain, the machine spirit reports a power surge, minimal but active." The hum intensified, rising in pitch. The light inside pulsed in time with the sound. The silence was gone, replaced by a low thrum that I could feel in my very bones. Something was in there, and it was awake.
Chapter 5. The Devil in the Machine.
The humming intensified, rising in pitch until it was a thin, needle-like sound that seemed to bore directly into my skull. The flickering yellow light from the crack in the door brightened, pulsing in time with the sound. The silence of the tomb was gone, replaced by the low thrum of something that had just been switched on. "Hex 7, I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is that?" "The machine spirit reports a power surge," the tech priest chirped, his voice a burst of happy static. "Minimal but active, and there is a secondary containment field failing." Vera's eyes, normally cold and analytical, were now wide with a primal terror I had never seen before. Her pale skin was clammy, her eyes locked on the door. "An old place, Vale," she hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. "An old power. This is no machine spirit, this is an echo of the warp." Castus took a single, deliberate step forward, planting his boots firmly on the deck. His scarred armor didn't look so battered now. It looked like a shield. His bolter was raised and his hand was steady. "The Emperor protects," he rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly prayer. "But we must be his instruments." My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. The Inquisition-grade clearance codes, the derelict black site, the power surge, and the failing containment field. A tech priest's skull on the floor. This wasn't a research station. It was a prison. The door shuddered, a deep metallic groan that rattled my teeth. The humming stopped, replaced by the sound of 1,000 voices whispering in my head. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a raw croak. "What's an echo of the warp?" Vera's expression soured. The terror was still there, but now it was warring with pure, seething irritation. "It means we are standing outside a prison for a perversion of life, you ignorant fool. A binding of a demonic entity to a mortal host. A corruption, a weapon. A demon host," Castus finished, his voice like cold steel. "And its prison is coming apart at the seams." "A demon host?" I gibbered. What the throne is a demon host? I literally just told you, you stupid monkey, she snarled at me. Would it help if I drew you a pict with small words? Safe bet it isn't good then, stammered Alara, her voice high with fear. Vera scoffed, a short, sharp sound that was more hiss than laugh. Her eyes, still wide with terror, darted to Alara before returning to the groaning door. A safe bet? She spat, her voice a low, furious whisper. By the folly of the short life, is that what you call it? A safe bet is whether the dust on your boots is from this deck or the last. This, you witless ape, is a certainty. And it has a hunger. Gorzak, utterly oblivious to the true nature of the horror we faced, just grinned. A feral grin split his face, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. He hefted his choppa, the rusty blade glinting. He saw a very big, very angry fight, and that was all that mattered. A deep tearing sound erupted from inside the room. The door bent inward, metal groaning like a tortured animal. The choice was no longer ours. The demon host was coming, and its prison is coming apart at the seams. My teeth rattled in their...
Chapter 6. The Angel of the Machine.
The door didn't so much open as it simply tore itself apart. With a final agonizing groan, the heavy metal bulkhead peeled back like a grotesque flower of warped steel. A cloud of ozone and stale ancient air billowed out, and with it, my crew screamed. Vera, who had been a whirlwind of cold fury and fear a moment ago, stumbled back as if struck by an invisible blow, her hands flying to her head. A guttural sound, a mix of a gasp and a choked sob, tore from her throat, her body convulsing. She looked like she was drowning in air. Alara was worse. She crumpled to the floor, her hands clasped over her ears as if to muffle a piercing shriek. Whatever she heard, I couldn't over the dying groan of the bulkhead and the sickeningly loud sound of my own heart thumping in my chest. My gaze snapped to Castus, and my stomach churned. The Space Marine, a warrior who had faced horrors I couldn't even imagine, the Emperor's finest, was trembling. His massive hands, which had been clutching his bolter with such certainty, now gripped the weapon with a raw, agonizing tremor. His helmeted head was bowed as if in silent, profound agony as he sank to his knees. He was a monument to quiet, internal torment, fighting a battle I couldn't even perceive. I could hear his labored, ragged breathing over the comms, a sound of profound pain. And then I saw Gorzak. He hadn't moved. He was just standing there, his immense shoulders hunched in confusion. His choppa was still held high, a puzzled expression on his green face. He wasn't in agony. He wasn't trembling. He just looked annoyed, like he was waiting for everyone to finish their little show so he could get to the smashing. The psychic assault, a cacophony of pleas and curses that was tearing my crew apart, had simply ignored him. For a moment, all the noise in my head, the drone of the life support, the hum of the ship, the thud of my own heart, vanished. The world went eerily, impossibly quiet. It was only for a second, a flicker of perfect cold silence, before the chaos of my companion's suffering rushed back in. I didn't have time to process it, to wonder why. My only thought was on the crumpled body of Alara and the sickeningly convulsive movements of Vera, and what the throne was going on with Castus. Standing in the doorway, wreathed in the flickering amber light, was the demon host. It was female, or it had been once. Her flesh was a patchwork of pallid skin and grotesque scar tissue, a grim parody of human form. A spine of jagged bone serrations ran down her back, and ligaments and sinew snaked from her joints. Her hair, or what was left of it, was a tangle of fine black filaments, like a spider's web woven from shadow. But it was her face that was the true horror. One side was a pristine, beautiful human visage, her eye wide with a fear that had been frozen for centuries. The other side was a mosaic of scar tissue and twisted flesh, with a single, glowing red eye where her original eye had been. Her lips, on the human side, were chapped and blue, while the demonic side was a rictus of bone and twisted sinew. For a moment, we all froze. The whispers in my head solidified into a single, honeyed voice. It was speaking to me, but the voice had a glitchy, slithering echo beneath it, as if its words were being filtered through a broken soul. "Captain Chiron Vale," the voice slithered into my mind, as clean and clear as if it were standing right next to me. The human half of her face twisted into a grotesque smile, while the demonic side remained a fixed, horrifying grin. "You worry so much about your little debts, the docking fees, Dravik's friends, such mundane concerns." I stared, paralyzed. This thing knew my name. It knew my problems. "And you," it purred, turning its head with an unnatural jerking motion to Castus, its red eye fixing on the black teardrop on his armor. A soundless laugh echoed in my skull. A lamenter. The doomed sons of Sanguinius. You cling to your faith, but you cannot outrun your chapter's legacy. Your suffering is exquisite. Castus's hand, which had been clutching his bolter with righteous fury, trembled. The color had drained from his face, leaving only a deathly pallor. This wasn't a monster to be shot. It was a soul eater, a thing that fed on despair. "And the Eldar," the voice whispered, the tone now filled with a contempt that chilled me to the bone. "Vera, you walk among the Mon-Ki like a ghost, haunted by the memory of a fallen empire. How much you despise them, and yet you are nothing without them." Vera's eyes, which had been filled with terror, now burned with a cold fury. She clutched her blade, her knuckles white. She looked ready to lash out, but I knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that she wouldn't survive a single blow. The demon host's head snapped to the side, its gaze falling on Gorzak. For a moment, its taunting stopped. The psychic whispers found nothing to cling to, only a vast, simple rage. The human half of its face twisted in confusion, while the demonic side grinned with an almost delighted malice. The voice in my head shifted, now filled with a light mocking tone. "And this one? Oh, this is a special one, isn't it?" It chuckled, a sound like glass breaking. Such a beautiful, empty mind. A single, solid wall of rage. You want nothing but to smash, to break, to conquer, but there is no fear, no ambition, no pain to taste. You are a toy with only one setting. Gorzak, utterly oblivious to the true nature of the horror, just shrugged. "Dat ting talking too much," he grunted, taking a step forward, choppa held high. "I smash it now." "No," I hissed, grabbing his arm, although it didn't move an inch. "Don't you dare!" The demon host's gaze fell on Hex 7, who was still buzzing happily. And the pathetic machine. It knows me. It recognizes the beauty of my corruption. It knows the truth. The fusion of flesh and machine is not a prayer, but an embrace of the truth of the void. Hex 7's whirring stopped abruptly. He stood motionless, his mechadendrites twitching. A thin wisp of smoke curled from a vent in his chest. I knew with a cold, absolute certainty that we couldn't survive a fight with this. It wasn't a battle of bullets and blades. It was a battle of wills, of souls. In other words, we were so outmatched, it would be funny if we weren't about to die. This thing wasn't going to kill us, it was going to break us first. Our only choice was to run.
Chapter 7. The Last Failsafe.
"Run!" I screamed, the word a desperate, raw plea. "Now! Get out!" Castus roared and came to his feet, firing a long, deafening burst from his bolter. To our collective horror, each bolt simply burst a foot away from the demon host's chest. But it broke the spell over us. My legs, which had been frozen in place, finally obeyed. I turned and ran, the thud of my boots echoing the frantic beat of my heart, with Vera right beside me. Castus, his massive form surprisingly agile, was a step behind, his breathing ragged. The sound of Gorzak's heavy boots finally finding their rhythm was a terrifying comfort. He might have been a simpleton, but he was a fast one. Ilara, her pragmatism overriding her fear, was already a step ahead, sprinting for the docking bay. The demon host didn't give chase, not at first. It merely watched, a predator toying with its prey. I could feel its gaze on my back, an intense psychic heat that promised a slow, agonizing end. The whispers in my head shifted from taunts to a light, mocking laughter. It was amused. It knew we couldn't outrun it. Then came the bone spike. With a sickening crunch, a sharp shard of bone erupted from the floor just ahead of Vera's foot. She shrieked, a sound of fury and surprise, and twisted her ankle, stumbling. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back to her feet. The bone spike dissolved into black smoke almost as quickly as it had appeared. The demon host was playing with us, and its game was lethal. "We need to get to the Misery!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Hex, what's our fastest route?" Hex 7's voice came through the comms, a stuttering, garbled burst. Corrid, or 87% FECNC. As we rounded a corner, the rumbling became a deafening roar. The deck plates beneath us shuddered violently. A large, rusted bulkhead tore loose from the ceiling and crashed to the floor behind us, narrowly missing Gorzak. The lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness, broken only by our headlamps. "What in the throne is happening?" I screamed over the din, my eyes wide. "Is the station collapsing?" Hex 7's voice cut through the chaos, no longer a happy chirp, but a strained mechanical hiss. "The machine, spirit of the sea station, is corrupted beyond repair. I initiated a self-destruct sequence to prevent contagion. It is active." I froze. He'd what? "You initiated a station-wide self-destruct and hadn't thought to mention it until now?" No. I did it when I first connected to the machinist's spirit when then we bearded. "You idiot!" Vera screamed, a sound of pure rage and terror. The air around us grew thick and hot, and a wave of psychic energy slammed into us. We were 100 meters from the docking bay, and the station was coming apart at the seams. We burst into the docking bay just as the first explosions rocked the far end of the station. The roar was deafening, the fire a hungry god consuming the darkness. We scrambled up the ramp of the Misery as the docking claws screeched and failed, the ship's emergency clamps barely holding. Ilara, already in the pilot's chair, slammed her hands down on the thruster controls. The clamps released with a final desperate clatter. The Misery lurched away from the station just as it began to rip itself apart, the viewplate filled with a blinding white light, followed by a torrent of roaring fire. The station, a sprawling skeletal husk, erupted in a silent, fiery scream. In the center of the inferno, I saw it. A single fleeting image seared into my mind. The form of the demon host, its two-sided face a momentary sculpture of agony and fury, its form twisting in the flames. A final piercing psychic scream, not of a demon, but of a soul being ripped apart, echoed in my mind, a wound that would never heal. And then, it was gone. The misery shuddered as it plunged into the inky blackness of space, its thrusters screaming in protest. The station was gone. The demon host was gone. We were alive. But as I looked at my crew, at the silent, trembling Hex 7, the furious Vera, the stunned Gorzak, the grim, broken Castus, and the exhausted, tight-lipped Ilara, I knew that none of us would ever truly be the same again. And I also knew that without the container, we definitely weren't getting paid.
The arrival of the heresy's shadow was not announced by voxhail or transponder code. It simply appeared, a sleek black gun cutter of the Imperial Navy's finest design, its hull etched with the sigil of the Ordo Malleus. It hung motionless in the blackness, a single baleful eye in the sea of stars. On the bridge, Inquisitor Valerius looked out at the scene of the crime. The debris field of the derelict Mechanicus station was not a chaotic mess of scrap metal. It was a precise, fiery monument to its own destruction, its every girder and bulkhead a silent testimony to a controlled detonation. The Inquisitor, his face a grim mask of perpetual displeasure, had spent years, decades even, building this little prison. He had personally overseen the capture of the demon host, the construction of its containment cells, and the placement of the safeguards. He closed his eyes, and the astral void beyond the viewport became an ocean of psychic energy. He did not need data to know what had happened. He could feel it. The lingering scream of a soul being ripped from its vessel was a psychic wound that resonated across the void. The demon host was gone. His precious tool, a weapon he had intended to use against a greater foe, had been lost to a crude mercenary attack. "They did not just destroy it," he murmured, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "They broke it, ripped its soul from its binding, a heinous act of unrefined power." His acolyte, a twitchy, nervous woman named Kale, stood a respectful distance away. "Who, Inquisitor?" Valerius's eyes snapped open. He could see their psychic signatures, ghostly imprints left on the very wreckage of the station. A motley collection, a collection of fools. "I can taste their presence on the ether," he said, the words now filled with a chillingly focused rage. "I can taste them all," he said, his rage building. "Every one of them save for a pair of perplexing voids. A human captain. His mind is an absence, a dead space that hums with a silent fury. A lamenter, his soul a well of righteous, unending despair. An Eldar, a blade of contempt and ancient arrogance. An orc, a curious, beautiful, empty mind, a singular rage with no thought behind it. And a human pilot, her mind a fortress of practiced indifference and contempt." He even felt the corrupted essence of the tech priest, the echo of its broken machine prayers. He paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "And the second void, it is not a true absence, but a presence so powerful it has been meticulously and expertly suppressed. A mind so alien to me I cannot even fathom its essence. It is a mystery." "Find them," he commanded, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. "Scour the data stream, cross-reference all port manifests, all docking fees, every single scrap of information. They have not just stolen a tool, they have insulted my work. They have destroyed a valuable asset of the Imperium. I will find them, and when I do, they will learn the true meaning of an honest day's heresy." Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you have enjoyed this story.